good evening. Okay, in accordance
Tasting. Yep, let's go, we're good.
with the Open Public Meetings Act, PL 1975, Chapter 231, adequate notice of this regular meeting of the Board of Adjustment of the Township of Franklin has been provided. Board members, applicant, professionals, and members of the public, please speak directly into microphones so that our recording secretary can properly process minutes. Applicants and professionals, please fill out the sheet on the table when you've completed your testimony, and thank you. With that being said, we can proceed to the roll call.
Cheryl Bethia. Here. Richard Prokanic. Here. Joel Reese, Alan Rich, and Gary Rosenthal all asked to be excused this evening. Robert Shepard.
Here.
Vasim Verdas. Here. Elizabeth Clarkin. Here. And Chairman Thomas.
Here. Resolutions and discussion we can move on by and go down to the hearing section. One announcement in that regard. If you're here for St. Charbel Maronite Church, ZBA 20-00027, D3 conditional use variances, preliminary final site plan with a C variance in which the applicant proposes demolishing the existing church and daycare use, as well as 4 of the single-family homes on the site, and constructing a new 35,699 square foot place of worship at 526 Easton Avenue, Somerset, Block 261, lots 1 to 6 in an OP zone and R7. This was carried from February 17th, and it will be carried to May 18th, correct?
No, June 16th.
It will be carried to June 16th, and further notification is required. You're here for that, it's not going to be heard. First hearing will be Arthur and Diane Wilmot, ZBA 22-00003, C variance in which a shed straddling the property line needs to be moved onto the applicant's property at 2125 Amwell Road, Somerset, Block 510, Lot 3.02, in the R40 zone. Mr. Wilma?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I'll give a overview of it. This application resulted from originally from an application that was before you for the landscaping business next door. As part of that application, it was discovered that there was a shed that was straddling the property line. As part of that approval, that shed needed to be relocated. Mr. Wilmot owns the adjoining property. The normal accessory structure setback in that zone is 25 feet. Mr. Wilmot would like to relocate the shed so it's 15 feet from the side property line. TRC had no issues. It's an existing shed, and the adjoining property is a commercial use in a residential zone.
And the 15 feet that it's away from is his property, correct?
I believe it's a member.
I own both properties.
Okay. And you heard what Mr. Healy said. Is that basically your understanding of everything, and do you agree with it?
Yes.
Anything you want to add to it?
No.
We're open to the public. Anyone who'd like to speak on this application? And we'll close. As you can see, we can try and move these a little more efficiently for something like this. Is there anyone who has a question? Anyone who would like more information? Anyone who would like to offer a motion?
I move that we grant to Arthur and Diane Wilmot the right to move their shed only 15 feet, giving them a variance on the side lot restriction, which is ordinarily 25.
You have a second?
I'll second.
Full board?
Cheryl Bethia. Yes. Richard Prokanic.
Yes.
Robert Shepard.
Yes.
Vasim Verdas.
Yes.
Elizabeth Clarkin.
Yes.
Robert Thomas.
Yes, good luck with it. You're set to go, and,
Thank you very much.
okay. Does make a difference in person as opposed to virtual.
Yeah, right.
The actual hearing that we will be having, 1784 Capital Holdings, ZBA LLC, ZBA 2100009, B1 use variance, preliminary and final major site plan with C variances in which the applicant is seeking approval for construction of 125,335 square foot self-storage facility at 1613 Route 27, Somerset, Block 85, lots 58 and 59.02 in the ZB zone, the GB zone, carried from March 17th. No further notification needed, and the applicant ready to proceed. Maybe we could start with a quick, brief overview of what we left back in March, where we are at this point.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the board. Good evening. For the record, again, my name is Chris Murphy with the law firm of Murphy, Schiller, and Wilkes, here on behalf of applicant 1784 Capital Holdings, LLC. We were before this board on December 16th, 2021, presented plans, presented engineering testimony, architectural testimony, and planning testimony related to this development application. After some feedback from the board, we decided to adjourn that hearing to a new date, make some revisions to the plans to reflect some of the board's concerns. We submitted updated plans to the board on February 18th, 2022. Those were engineering plans. We also submitted truck turn plans on the same date. You're in receipt of those. I believe we've had a chance to review them. Tonight we're here, we'll put on engineering testimony to discuss in particular the changes made to those original plans. Then we'll put on planning testimony to justify the variance relief in connection with this application. We have a few professionals here tonight. Our first is Paul Mutch from Stonefield Engineering. He's our professional engineer. If we can get him sworn in and then qualify him as an expert in the area of engineering.
Can we I just have one question.
Sure.
As I recall last time, we had engineering testimony and we had architect testimony. We also had planning testimony?
We did have planning testimony.
Was it one of the people who testified sort of with two hats, or was it?
It wasn't. It was Craig Rangenkamp. He's our professional planner. He's here again tonight.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Okay, that's, game plan sounds good. There's one other additional announcement I need to make with this. We will not, this is for the public also, we will not be voting on this tonight. We're going to finish and complete the entire hearing. We do not have enough members for a vote. The 3 members who are absent will be listening to the tapes, submitting questions ahead of time, and the next time that we meet will be to take a vote, period. So all the public discussion, everything, be concluding this evening. Okay, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mudge, did you previously testify in December?
No, my
Oh,
colleague
okay.
did.
Okay, if you can just raise your right hand, you swear the testimony you're about to give. You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you for the record.
No, close to your mouth. Can't just hold it like it's a toy. Close to your mouth.
Pretty loud guys.
That's good.
We'll get there. It's in-person thing's different, right?
Take your mute off, please, sir. I'm kidding.
You want me to?
You want to qualify him, Mr. Mudge?
Sure. Mr. Mutch, well, for the benefit of the board, can you please provide some information on your educational background and professional experience? Field of engineering?
Certainly. Graduated from Rowan University with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I've been practicing in the field for roughly 11 years with specific experience on the application you're going to see this evening. And I've been accepted before the planning board in Franklin, and now I ask you to accept me as an expert.
That's fine, go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
And were you you're employed by Stonefield Engineering?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Paul, you reviewed the plans that are being submitted to the board this evening?
That's correct.
Okay. For the benefit of the board, can you please provide testimony related to the engineering elements of this project, specifically addressing the changes that were made in connection with the February 18th, 2022 plans?
Yes, and last time you heard from my colleague Josh Klein, obviously we work very closely together on most projects, but specifically this one. So I'm well versed in these plans, and I'm looking forward to walking the board through all the changes that we've made over the last few months since our last meeting. So the first exhibit I'll just focus on, and probably the most of my testimony will be on the screen right now. It is a site plan rendering exhibit. I'm not sure where we left off with exhibits, if we want to mark this B1 or how we want to mark it.
Yeah, let's just mark it A1 at today's date, April 21st. And it's, can you just, oh, you said it's a colorized site plan?
Yes, it's a colorized rendering of the site plan that was submitted on February 14th. Same content and overall look there, except we've taken the liberty of adding in color, landscaping to give the board a better idea and a 2D sense of what we're trying to do and what we've changed since the previous meeting.
Can you make the picture part of it bigger?
That's where I'm at.
Oh,
Great minds think alike.
perfect.
Yeah, so I'll zoom this exhibit in so everybody can get a better idea of the actual physical development rather than some of the ancillary things on the edge of the page. But basically, we heard the concerns of the board, the public, as well as the professionals at the last meeting, and we've worked pretty diligently over the last few months to address those concerns. We've met with the concerned neighbor, we've met with the professionals, and we revised the plans a few times over the last few months to get a plan that we feel is a substantial improvement over the previous plan, falls better in line with the professionals and the board comments, and looks to kind of address some of the concerns that we heard at the last meeting and over the last few months working with your professionals. An overview of the major changes that we've made, and the most significant change is certainly that we removed a block of 25 RV spaces that were previously pressed right up against the property line on the southern block. And what I'll do is I'll just mark this exhibit. But basically, if you remember from the previous meeting, there was a large block of RV spaces located adjacent to this, 25 RV spaces that were essentially pressed right against the property line. Those RV spaces have been removed and replaced with additional buffering and landscaping, and that came from the comments at the board meeting as well as just back and forth with your professionals over the last several months to get to this point. In addition, we've reduced the overall intensity of the development. Some of the drive aisles have been reduced, pavement area has been reduced overall to try and better meet some of the concerns that we heard. And we've also heard some of the concerns of the neighbors. We worked with the neighbor to the north on the stormwater, and we've also adjusted some of the fencing along the southern property line where we are closest to that southern abutter, and we've changed the fence from that decorative wrought iron to an opaque board-on-board type fence that will provide a more definitive screen for those residences. Just, again, trying to take in the various comments that we received at the last meeting and from the public and the professionals over time.
Okay, now you've said one thing that is of interest to me that I would like a little bit more information about, and that is you said you've reduced the impervious coverage.
That's correct.
And what was the impervious coverage before, and what is it now?
It was previously, let me just make sure I get the numbers right for you here. It was previously 69%, a little over 69%, and we've reduced it to a little bit over 60% in the proposed condition. So roughly 7.5% reduction when the math all works out on it, but that's been the reduction overall.
Okay.
In addition to that, we've kind of set up the rear of the property a little bit better. Most of the front of the property has remained the same. The main self-storage building had remained the same, but most of the work was done to the rear of the property where you have that RV canopy and parking spaces in the rear. The side setback back there went from essentially 0 or 5 feet at that southern property line with that previous block of RV spaces to up over 50 feet and 51 feet to be exact along that property line. We've also centered up the RV spaces that do continue to exist in the rear, so there's a nice 57-foot setback to that canopy structure from both property lines, both to the north and to the south. Again, just trying to bring the massing of the site to the center. So the buildings, the canopy, everything to the center, so we can establish a nice green band and buffering along the outsides. We've decreased the building coverage overall. That comes with that canopy that removed for the RV spaces. That's about a 4% reduction in overall building coverage. The canopy that's over those RV spaces counts as building coverage as part of this. So again, pulled it away from the property line, reduced it overall, 4% reduction in building coverage. Like we talked about, the impervious coverage coming down about 7.5%, a pretty substantial decrease from the previous plan. We've increased the buffers generally in the rear where those RV spaces are, but we've also increased the buffer along the frontage by 5 feet. We've increased the side buffer to the north along those RV spaces by 10 feet, and we've increased the buffer along the side to the south of the site by 29 feet. And that's where really your substantial buffer gets implemented. We went from RV spaces parked on the property line to a really nice green band, dense plantings in that wrought iron fence that we talked about a little bit. So really the overall goal here was to limit the impact of the residential, establish a very densely planted green band that really goes around the entire site. So where we were really encroaching pretty substantially before where some of these residential homes are to the south, we've now established a pretty hefty buffer, certainly more than this there today, and we've planted it with a substantial amount of trees to make sure that, that screen is not only visually interesting throughout the year, but provides a very heavy and dense evergreen screen. So, there's a lot of separation between us and the residential.
Okay, now I want to go over something that you said again. You said that, and this always slows me down when we talk about to the north and to the south, but I think that as I look at this map, don't do that.
Sorry.
As I look at this map, if I look up, that's to the north, to the bottom's to the south, and that's to the west, right?
Yes,
That would be to the west.
the page orientation is correct here.
Okay.
Top of page is north, bottom of page is south. I could have been more clear with that.
All right, so now, what is the setback, I guess you'd call it, to the north?
The setback is to the canopy structure is 57 feet. And if we zoom in a little bit here, the setback to the actual parking field is more like 29 feet, I believe, at the top. And I'll just zoom in. One hand makes it a little tough. But yeah, this dimension here is 29 feet from property line to the edge of the parking. There'll be a small parapet wall and fence that's a couple feet encroaching into that, but we're establishing essentially, let's call it a 27-foot buffer along that area there.
Okay, so now, you just said something, you said that's a 29-foot buffer up to the parking, but it doesn't look like that's the parking. That looks like the raceway that goes around the whole thing.
Yeah, I just intermingled the two words for parking. The pavement line is 29 feet in that area.
And what is it supposed to be? What's required under the ordinance?
Let me just check. It's meant to be 15 feet along that.
15?
15, yes.
Okay, all right, so you've got more buffer than is required then?
Wait, that's your, when you say it's
50,
it's 50.
50.
50, all right, now we're on the same page, right. Okay, so you're 29 instead of 50. What's at the bottom, at the southern side, what do we got there?
Similar there, everything's centered up, so it's 29 feet.
Okay, and then to the west, what have we got there?
To the west,
Yeah.
everything stays pretty consistent going to our basin. That's all green area back there, so
Right.
technically I think we comply, but there is a fence that goes around the basin, so that's all green area.
Yeah.
Back there, so that's the same essentially 29 feet of true green space, and then you get into the basins, which are planted, as you can see in this graphic.
Basins. You mean with the water retention thing?
Yeah, stormwater management.
They're not there now, that's the plan.
Yes, they are not there today.
I've been there, so
Yeah, there's large soil and
Right.
mulch piles in the back right now.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, certainly, I'm here to answer any questions that you have. So, again, what we tried to do as part of this application is create that green band that we're talking about right now around the site. We are asking for relief But overall, we've planted it in a really substantial way, and the previous application had about 240 trees planted along kind of the three sides that you see, and in this proposal, and working with your professionals, we've increased that number to 340. So there is a substantial investment being made in screening, plantings, and trees, and that is going to be supplemented by 200 or so shrub plantings throughout the site, as well as that parapet wall. There's going to be a 2-foot wall that kind of headlight screens everything, a wrought iron decorative fence along the rear, so trying to bring an aesthetic appeal to all the property lines that abut the residential. I was over there this evening just looking around. I think it'll give a nice separation there versus some of the trucks and things that are parked right up against their fence today.
Our planner, when he looked at your revised plan, said that the trees aren't the right, that the trees you're planning on planting are not the right size. They're supposed to be 6-foot trees, and they're much smaller than that. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think we've upgraded the landscaping plan. Certainly all the buffer plantings will be 6 feet and above. I think they were talking about the rear property line, or that western property line, where we have some of the discharges for the stormwater. There are some shrub plantings that wouldn't get to that 6 feet, but we've certainly centralized and focused the 6-foot heavy evergreen plantings that'll eventually grow along the side property lines to give the residential a really substantial buffer. And those are double and triple planted, so it'll be a really dense screen for the adjacent properties.
Okay, and what's out to the west? What's out past the basins?
There's just open space to the left of this,
So it's
back to the stream.
It's not built up with more apartments and things back there?
No, I think I have a zoomed out aerial here. This is just the site plan set that we submitted, so I don't think we need to mark it, but I've got an aerial exhibit here that I can, on the cover page of our submission package. So there is a little bit, there's green area behind us. There are some residential to the rear, but we certainly have some pretty, a large amount of separation from the rear of the property to the residential, and then it goes back to the stream and the undeveloped area.
Okay.
And we're certainly willing to work with your professionals on any additional plantings that they see. We've looked at those review letters, and we can certainly comply with their comments. We don't take any issue.
Well, can you go over the stormwater management system, what's currently there, what we're proposing?
Yeah, certainly the stormwater management on the current site there is nothing. So any stormwater that falls on the current site flows uncontrolled to any one of the number of property lines and to the rear, to the sides, and onto the residential lots. What our proposed stormwater management system does is it collects all of the stormwater that's on site. So you won't have any stormwater runoff directly from our site, other than the green band. Obviously, you'll have a little bit of stormwater that hits the green band, but the pavement, the buildings are all collected, conveyed underground to 2 separate detention basins that are located at the rear of the site. So where you have a condition now where construction materials and dirty water is flowing into kind of those swales that are on either side of the property, that's going to be generally removed. There'll be some planted and densely screened areas that do run off there. It'll be non-noticeable. But we're taking all of that water, collecting it underground, all of our pavement and buildings, and directing it to the rear of the site, where the detention basins are they're really bio basins in the back for treatment. They will store the water. The water will, fill those basins up to control the flows and certainly control the overall impact to the area. And also those basins will remain dry because we've decided to underdrain them. The soils aren't great in the area for infiltration directly into the ground. So we didn't want to rely on infiltration to make sure those basins stay dry and stay maintained. So we have an underdrain in each one of those basins. So it'll flow through a soil media for treatment of the water. It will then be drained out via that underdrain or some of the outlet control structures we have, and then it'll flow into those swales that are not impactful to the residential and kind of shoot it out beyond the residential. So I think you're going to see a substantial betterment of the runoff conditions in the proposed condition, because we're controlling runoff. We're not having this uncontrolled construction material flow to the adjacent properties. We're slowing down the flows, retaining water, and then we're kind of sending it to a controlled point that'll get it back to the stream and not impact the residential.
And Paul, we received a letter from Kingsbury Acres, which is the development to the north of the property, dated April 8th. I believe that was submitted to the board as well. If everybody will recall, there were some questions from the property manager at Kingsbury Acres related to the stormwater management. He had come at the last meeting and made some comment. There's a letter that was submitted to the board by Kingsbury Acres. I don't know if it made its way to everybody. On April, oh, Chip, how are you? On April 8th, that says that we've met with them, we've discussed these issues, and now they are in support of the application. I believe we have somebody here that will probably make a comment to the public during the public comment session.
For the record, it was not provided to the board, so if
Okay.
they want to testify, they can do so.
Okay, and we'll do that. I apologize for presuming that it was.
Okay, just want-
But that has been, Paul, if you could just address that. We have met with the neighboring properties to the north. There were concerns at the last hearing about that, if we'll all recall, and we've resolved those issues. It's very rare that as a developer, you get a letter of support from a neighboring property. Sometimes people just don't show up. We actually have a letter saying that we've met their concerns and they support the application. Somebody, I believe, from Kingsbury Acres is here, and we'll put that on record. But, okay.
Yeah, the last item I have on the list of major changes is...
Wait, what did the letter say?
Well, I'm not going to, I don't know if I'll read it to the record, but we do have somebody here to testify on it.
All right, then I'll wait with bated breath.
Okay.
I love that, I love that. So the last piece of the changes that we made, we've also worked with your professionals on the lighting, and what we wanted to ensure is that there was no light spill, obviously, onto the residential that abuts the property. So we've taken basically all of the light fixtures on site, we've reduced their mounting heights to make sure that any lighting that happens on site is maintained to the operations of the self-storage. We are requiring some relief for lighting because of those changes. They're really driven by those changes because the lights are a little bit brighter underneath, and there's a little bit less light around the exterior of the site. So some of our averages and our ratios are off now because we have very low light levels next to the residential and then a little bit brighter on site. So it kind of throws those averages out of whack. In the professional's letter, I believe that they say they are agreeable to those waivers because they are in an effort to reduce impact. And the benefit of the lighting plan here is that we do have 0-foot candles in essentially all areas that abut the residential. There are a couple areas where we're at 0.1-foot candles near the driveways. Obviously, we need to light those a little bit more, also removed from any residential homes and things of that nature, and the 0.1 is a really low light level. And then finally, we take a very conservative approach when we calculate those light levels because we don't factor in these triple evergreen screen trees that we're putting in, the fences, everything else that goes in that will eventually block the light. We just do it as if there's nothing there to make sure that the lighting is conservatively designed to not have impact. So another thing we've been working on with your professionals over time to make sure that the impacts stay internal to the site rather than having some sort of external impact to the adjacent residential.
Great. Paul, does that end your direct?
Yeah, that ends my direct. If there's any questions, anything you'd like me to elaborate on, I'd be glad to.
Tell me about the fences that are going around the property. From reading our professional's report, it sounds like there are several different kinds of fences depending on where you are.
Yeah, that's correct. And what is our client's general standard for these types of developments is to put something that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than, let's say, a chain link fence. So they always do a wrought iron fence around their sites to give kind of the aesthetic of that darker colored fence, but also give the security of the site. They also do a 2-foot parapet wall. It's essentially a masonry wall that is intended to kind of complement in a decorative way those wrought iron fences, but it also doubles as a screen because that 2-foot high wall blocks, in an opaque sense, any kind of headlight glare that you'd get as cars come around the site. So in addition to our buffering, we also have this small wall that surrounds the site. And
It's on the inside of the chain link, on the inside of the wrought iron fence?
That'll be part of it. So the fence will actually sit on top of that parapet wall.
Okay.
And then outside of that is where we have the green space and the buffering planted. So it really, the intention of that fence and the parapet wall is to really bring an end to where the self-storage use is and then bring a start to where the buffering and the screening will be. So the internal operations are kind of contained by that fence, and the external operations and the screening are kind of afforded to the adjacent users. In one specific section at the kind of where the main building is and where we're kind of closest to the residential, we have swapped out some of the wrought iron fence for a opaque vinyl fence or a board-on-board fence or whatever we decide to put there to give them a little bit more screening. Our site sits a little bit higher than the residential there, and there's a little bit of a retaining wall, 3 or 4 feet. So to further screen and make sure that the impact of any operations that are happening there, we've turned that fence opaque and kind of switched out the wrought iron to make sure that there's a really dense screen. And again, that's in addition to the existing trees, in addition to the screening plantings that we're proposing. So that's the intention of the fence. It serves as security, aesthetic. It's meant to make the site kind of a little bit higher end.
So, sorry.
I was going to ask him, just to follow through, can you just, so is the wall all entirely around the site? The parking lot?
Yes, yeah, the wall is entirely around the site.
Okay.
It ends at the front of the building, but you can see kind of in the top corners, that wall circulates the entire site.
Okay, and then can you with your cursor show the board where it's going to be a solid fence versus where it's going to be a decorative
Yep,
fence?
and I'll just zoom in a little bit more so we can see the actual call-outs that say. So what we're doing is, let's see where this call-out is. It's in this area. All right, so it transitions for the entire bottom of the site. So you can see this call out here in the bottom left, where we transition from wrought iron to a solid fence. So basically, in addition to all these buffer plantings like I spoke to, we're going to have a solid fence that follows this entire line as you come forward on the site. So that's intended to just give that additional screen that we were talking about, in addition to the wrought iron fence.
So that's one whole side of the property?
Yeah, it'll be an opaque fence.
Okay.
And what about the northerly side?
The northerly side is going to be, as you can see, it's a little bit more equal in grade on the northern side. So we're able to really plant and double plant those evergreen screenings along the northern side. So we don't necessarily need that opaque fence. There's a line of existing trees and then a line of very densely planted. Mr. Healy, did that provide enough information, or? Okay.
No, my pleasure, thank you.
Any other board questions?
Yes, I have a question. This is about the stormwater management?
Yes.
The type of materials that you're using, the type of paver materials that you're using?
Oh, yes. So there's kind of a combination of two things that we're using on the site, and it's meant for water quality treatment. It's kind of part of the new DEP rules, where they encourage you to use pervious pavement as well as pervious pavers in some sense, and it gives you a little bit more treatment for the water that's entering the basin in the rear that is then treated again by the soil media. So up front, you can see we have some interlocking pervious pavers to kind of bring a little bit of an aesthetic feel up front, and then we also have some select areas along the side of the building that's pervious pavement, which is kind of a new standard of the DEP that they're encouraging you to use, and the water kind of seeps through those, and it gives a little bit of extra treatment before we convey it back to the basin. It's all part of the, the new green infrastructure rules that the DEP are pressing.
Now, are those pervious, I'm sorry.
I was
Go
just going to
ahead.
say, I was just trying to understand the interweaving, the interlocking pavers.
Yeah, so
There was
it's-
a question about their level of meeting the standard for being porous.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be designed in a way that meets the NJDEP standards for porous pavement. We've been using these pretty frequently most recently, and there'll be certain maintenance standards that ensure that they continue to infiltrate that water.
Rich?
Kind of on the same topic with the stormwater management basins. Once the basins fill up and they start to discharge, where does that water go?
That water is discharged in the rear of the site. There's two There's essentially 2 discharge points at either corner here for each of the basins, and that water is conveyed as it is today to the swales that take it to the stream that's to the west of the property.
What is a swale?
A swale is just kind of a depression in the ground that conveys water. So between the properties, there's kind of low-lying areas that collect all the water flowing off and just take it back to the kind of environmental areas.
So it's like a big ditch?
It's like a big ditch, yeah, and we owe the engineer, we've agreed to provide some additional information on that ditch to make sure it's all adequate to do it, but we've positioned our discharges as well as the stormwater after kind of restricting the flows and slowing the water down to kind of go in the same manner to the back of the property, and certainly not to the sides to where the residential is.
And what you're saying is that now we're collecting the water, it's being stored somewhere and then let out to a certain extent at a timed pace, as opposed to just hitting and going.
Exactly, yeah, it'll be kind of detained and slowed down in the basins and then discharged out of small orifices, so it'll be a very slow kind of trickle out rather than rainfall hits the existing soil on the site and just flows off in all directions.
Oh, great, that was kind of the gist of my question, is once it leaves the property, is it going towards the residential units? And you're stating that there's a swale that would intercept it and then bring it to
Yeah, you can, yes, that's correct, and you can kind of see it on this aerial that it's, where this planted tree line is where all of this is going. So right now, it kind of gets directed around from the south around to that, and everything gets collected here from the residential and directed back to the environmental areas. And that'll be continued, but more controlled now rather than just kind of an uncontrolled flow onto adjacent properties.
There'll be supporting calculations for that swale?
There will be, and we'll make sure that your engineer is comfortable with the plan that we're proposing.
Thank you.
I have one more question. You were talking before about pervious pavers. And then there was also some discussion in the memo from our planner about pervious concrete, perhaps, or some other product. My question really is, do these pervious materials, do they now not count as impervious coverage?
They do count, and those numbers I gave you on impervious coverage do count those.
Okay.
Even though they are pervious and it'll treat the runoff differently, you won't see kind of that sheet flow.
Yeah.
It does count towards our impervious coverage
Okay.
calculation.
All right. Thank you.
You dropped the impervious coverage from 69 to 60. What is the requirement?
The requirement, I believe, is 40%. Yeah, that's correct. It's 40% in this zone.
So can you show the board where so you're saying there's basically going from 69% to down to 60.9. Can you show the board where that reduction is?
Yeah, most of the reduction, like we've been talking about, came out of the rear of this property. So the drive aisles on the side of the building, and I can pull up the previous pan if they need to, but the drive aisles on the side of this canopy were all reduced. All the truck turns and the vehicle turning still work, but we reduced those drive aisles to increase those green buffers. And then we also took out that large block of 25 spaces that basically took up, all of the green space that you see at the bottom of this page. So that's where the reduction in impervious coverage was achieved. The front half of the site stayed mostly the same, but the rear of the site got reduced in overall scale and scope.
Okay, and just to clarify the record then, because on the original plans, the proposed impervious was identified as 59.8. My understanding is there was some miscalculation. It really was 69%. I forget exactly what the nature of the mistake was. Maybe it was the pervious pavement not counted?
It was actually a great question for the pervious pavement. We kind of apportioned the pervious pavement in a different category. So whereas on the zoning table it may look like it increased, an apples to apples comparison is a pretty substantial decrease. And we submitted a memo to the board trying to summarize that a little bit, but that was the difference in the calculation.
In the comparison from the plans that the board previously saw to what they're seeing now, it's being reduced from about 69% down to just short of 61%.
Yeah, something in that range. It's about 7.5% of an overall impervious reduction if you're comparing apples to apples.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have just a few more questions. Well, just to clarify, so you talked about the size of the plantings in the perimeter buffer. There are actually some smaller shrubs in that buffer, but I think you said that all of the trees in the perimeter buffer will be compliant in size in terms of, I think they need to be 6 feet in height?
Yeah, anything that's an evergreen tree or a buffer planting that's not a shrub or a ground cover will be compliant with that 6-foot requirement at planting.
The requirement is, it needs to consist of 6-foot-tall trees.
Yeah, and that is the vast majority of the plantings. Obviously, we have some shrubs as well, but anything that's considered the evergreen trees and the screening trees will certainly meet that requirement.
So part of the buffer requirements as well is that if there are existing trees, existing vegetation, you are to keep them. And there is areas along, particularly the southerly boundary, where existing trees are being removed, particularly, specifically for grading purposes, and then you're going to be putting new plantings in. And the ordinance requires that you prove to the board that basically it's infeasible to keep the existing trees. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think there are some select areas where we could keep some trees, and I walked the site a couple of times trying to identify any trees that really seem to have a lot of value out there. There's a lot of trees that are, older and more damaged in nature, but I think we'd be happy to agree to work with the professionals, yourself, and walk the site with our landscape architect and identify trees that have really high value to the area. And we've done this on a couple of recent applications where we kind of point to the trees that are obvious, healthy, mature trees that we want to try and save. And in most cases along that southern property line, we can adjust the grading to try and do just that. It's always difficult when you're kind of developing in kind of in a root area of these trees, but there is a lot of development on the site. So there's probably some opportunity to save a couple of the really mature trees along the southern property line, and we're happy to walk the site and identify those trees that we see as high-value trees that we should make that effort for.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me just see if I have any more questions. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, if there are no more,
Ask one more question. The detention basin, does it classify as a dam at any point?
No, it would not classify as a dam in this scenario.
there are no more board questions. It is my understanding that there is a group of objectors with an attorney. I'd like to offer the attorney the opportunity to question this witness.
Evening, Mark Rothberg from the Wilf Law Firm on behalf of Hempstead Garden Apartments, and we do have our own engineer and planner that we're going to be calling. So at this time, we're not going to cross-examine the engineer, and we'll be presenting our client's engineer for testimony before the board.
Okay. Then you are, I guess, ready to move on to the planner.
We are, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, do you want to?
Good question, is it more? Okay, we're discussing the opportunity to make a small change and what's more efficient before we move on. And the decision is to first open the discussion to the public if they have any questions for this witness concerning his testimony. So if there is any public out there who is not being represented by an attorney who would like to ask questions concerning the testimony given by this witness, now is the time to come forward to the podium.
Just to clarify, there will be a chance to make comments later. This is questions for this gentleman.
Right. Comment section will be later. Okay, then we'll close and then proceed with the planner.
Mr. Chair, I mean,
Mr. Rainkamp has been,
has previously been sworn, so you remain under oath.
Still under oath.
Yep, thank you.
and is qualified as an expert in the field of planning for the board's sake, or do you want to requalify?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Chairman, you're fine? We don't need to qualify.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rainkamp, you've reviewed the plans that have been submitted to the board, the master plan of the Township of Franklin and the zoning ordinance?
I have.
Okay.
Close enough?
Perfect.
Excellent.
Okay. For the benefit of the board, can you please provide planning testimony related to this application?
Sure, and I'll keep it brief this evening. I had the opportunity to provide most of the planning testimony at the December 16th hearing. As I did last time, let me again say that I was here for Mr. Mutch's testimony, and I adopt it as given by me, so I'm not going to repeat all the things he just said. So you can take that as if a planner said them as well. In terms of new testimony, essentially I'm here tonight to say that everything that I said last time still goes for the current plan. Obviously, the current plan has gotten substantially better than the plan I supported last time, so that's relatively easy to do. The two important improvements from a planning perspective are additional improvements to the stormwater management system. As has been said, that you've got essentially sheet flow from a heavily utilized area for material storage, truck parking, that will now be controlled, filtered, and released at a particular point on site that will have the least disadvantage to the adjoining neighbors, as opposed to sheet flowing wherever it goes. And the other is the provision of a landscape buffer, increased on all sides, but substantially on the southern side with the removal of a substantial number of the parking area for RV storage. So reducing the amount of having that use in your community, but still have the advantage of having it where it doesn't currently exist, while reducing it to increase the buffer to the south.
Wait, what did you just say?
We are continuing to provide the use, which generally doesn't exist in your community today, but we've reduced the amount of it. I think that's what I said.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Okay, all right. And I'll just briefly summarize the planning testimony by saying we were advancing three purposes of the MLUL. Purpose I, which under Burbridge v. Mine Hill is where we go and we're improving a non-conforming use. We're increasing the front yard setback, adding landscaping, improving stormwater management. We've got a very low intensity use coming to the site. Secondly, Purpose M, efficient use of land. You have a very deep and narrow lot that would be difficult to use as currently zoned. We have a use that has a low impact overall to the neighborhood. It fits generally in the mixed character of the uses along this particular roadway. And Purpose G, variety of uses. You've all heard and dealt with warehousing as an expanding use in New Jersey. Self-storage is essentially where small business does its warehousing. And we're seeing a substantial increase in need and demand for it in this post-COVID era. We're also demographically in an era where the current generation, the millennials and younger, are forming households, but not fast enough to take all the goods that we boomers want to give them. So we see a substantial increase in self-storage warehousing space of sort of the family heirlooms that aren't quite passing down as fast as we thought they might. So with those two areas of significant increased demand, it's appropriate for a community to find appropriate locations for this use to be able to expand in the community. The C variances have all improved from last time, so I won't say anything new about those. And that's all I had in terms of summarizing the new plan.
Any questions?
Yeah, I want you to go over those three reasons again. You were speaking rather fast, and I wasn't able to pay attention.
First is Purpose I, which is attractiveness, quality, civic uses. And it's where we go under Burbridge v. Mine Hill, a court case that dealt with the improving of site conditions as being a special reason. So,
Yeah, well, see, this is one of the problems that I have. It's that we have a use which existed before there was zoning.
exactly.
And now they want to, and now the person who owns that piece of property wants to sell it and move on, and somebody, if he can, and somebody wants to buy this piece of property and make use of it, but it's almost as if they're coming in it seems to me that they could certainly build something on this site that falls within the zoning as it exists. And they haven't done that either the first time that you guys came in, and I will say that you guys did listen. This is better than the first time, but there's still a lot of non-complying aspects to this that are, that trouble me a little bit, because if you could come in and do something that falls within the zoning rules, why don't you?
Good question. There are two parts to that. Let me deal with it as you started with, as a historical story.
Sure.
So what happened was this use was out here before zoning came along, or at least it was there in early days of zoning. And the neighborhood has grown up around it. And the neighborhood has grown up around it with it being there as a non-conforming use. It sits on an odd parcel. So you've got zoning on that parcel that really wants to be a large-scale residential use like the two abutters. The zoning isn't like the general business zone that has smaller lot sizes up and down the corridor. This one is zoned like the two residential properties, large-scale properties. You can have open space and recreational amenities and all the things that go with a community. With a relatively narrow lot left over, the historical accident of now being hemmed in, it's not really suitable to be used for a large-scale residential development. Could you do a single road down the middle to a cul-de-sac with townhouses on both sides and try and squeeze it in? Maybe. I'm not going to say it can't physically be laid out for any kind of residential use. But it's certainly not going to be the kind of residential development that you would have anticipated within this overall zoning district, where you had enough land to do it well and appropriately. So you've got a piece of land who really doesn't fit the zoning that it has because of this historical accident. It was in non-conforming use. In theory, maybe somebody should have bought it when they did the other residential developments, but that didn't happen. So we've got this historical accident that we now have to deal with. And the second is sort of the more trickier legal argument that once you're in non-conforming use, you've established some kind of expectation beyond which in addition to zoning, that as you're stepping down from that non-conforming use, that there's some place that you're starting from because of the non-conformity. And there are cases on this that kind of go both ways, but you're in a gray area of planning and law, what they're entitled to. What I think this application does is it gives you what I think is the absolutely least active use you could possibly have as a non-residential use that uses a narrow lot in an effective way and gives you something that I think would be attractive on the corridor, provides the storage of recreational vehicles and boats in an appropriate way that really, as far as I know, doesn't exist in the community. Maybe you guys know better, but it's a relatively new use that we're seeing from a planner's perspective as applications that I'm working on. And it's an opportunity to do something appropriate with the property. I agree it's not what it's zoned for, but it would be very difficult to give you a large-scale, well-planned-out residential development with amenities and all of that sort of stuff on a 300-foot wide lot.
Okay, that was I.
Yes.
Okay, there we go, let's keep going.
I was making it better than it was. M comes into the same perspective in terms of efficient use of land. You've got this weird lot out there in the middle of this. What are we going to do with it rather than let it be vacant? So M is trying to find appropriate good uses. You happen to be in a municipality that complied with its housing obligation. You don't need this for affordable housing. It's there to be able to do something productive, and this is a productive use for that lot. So rather than letting it sit vacant or letting it continue to be in the use that it's in, this is an opportunity to improve it given its constraints. And G, the last one, is simply a variety of uses. That we're seeing an extensively increased demand for self-storage, both for the small business warehousing and the demographic situation that we're in. You'll see it in all the journals in that particular industry that they're talking about this surging demand. And your zoning obviously hasn't responded to that immediately in the last few years, saying, oh, here's this trend we need to respond to. And under the Medici case, when you've got these kinds of new trends, new uses, new configurations, you're the folks we come to. The world has changed faster than your zoning, and we're looking for a place in your community for this use to go, and put together with the weird size and the history, this seems to be the right place for it.
I like that whole second time through much better. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to assume that you're not going to question this witness, and then we will open up to the public quickly. If there's anyone not represented by counsel who would like to ask this witness questions concerning his testimony, this is the time. Doesn't look like there are any, so we'll close. And in your presentation is completed for the moment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, we have an opportunity then for the objector's attorney to call two witnesses.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Mark Rothberg, and I represent Hempstead Garden Apartments. And with me tonight is our engineer, Christopher Briglia, P.E., who I would like to introduce and for testimony once we have him declared an expert, approved as an expert before the board.
Mr. Brigley, can you just raise your right hand? Get a microphone. You swear the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And for the record, if you could just spell your name.
Briglia. First name, Christopher, Christopher.
Mr. Briglia, could you state where you're currently employed?
I'm employed with Carroll Engineering, located on 105 Raider Boulevard, Hillsborough, New Jersey.
And your position there?
I'm a professional engineer in charge of the municipal and authority department. I also get involved with private sector site planning and subdivision, utility work, those sort of things.
And how long have you been an engineer at the firm?
I've been an engineer with this firm for 5 years. I originally started land development work in 1988, and I've been doing it since. Can I just go on and sort of elaborate? Okay. I've appeared before zoning boards, planning boards. I've also represented zoning boards and planning boards at a municipal capacity. I believe I appeared before this board a couple times years and years ago.
And you are licensed in New Jersey?
I'm a licensed engineer in New Jersey in good standing since 1995.
Let's move on.
Okay, did you have an opportunity to review the applicant's plans from an engineering perspective?
Yes, I did.
And the revised plans that were testified today that were revised in February, I believe, 18th, 2022?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Bringing your attention to the proposed stormwater management plan, what is your position with regard to the revisions to the plan from the past December 16, 2021 presentation?
Okay. Well, basically, I reviewed both sets. Looking at the stormwater management report and the plan, and also a careful review of the township engineer, or the planning board engineer's report dated March 4th, 2022. I have several bullet points I'd like to make in things that concern me and that should concern everybody else. After reviewing the board engineer's latest report dated 3/4/22, especially section F, which is stormwater management, there are still apparently 46 comments that are outstanding. Originally, there were 52 comments. from the October 18th, 2021 report. Just an indication to me that maybe there's some sort of problem with either complying or with design, or it just indicates to me there is a struggle in designing this system properly. The most important thing, the thing that jumped out at me right away, these detention ponds, they discharge onto an adjoining property. This is private property. It's not public property. There was never any permission given to be able to do this activity, discharge stormwater. There's no real facility to discharge that stormwater into, like a drainage system, catch basins, lawn basins, anything like that. There is a low-lying area in this private property that it's draining into, but there are no easements. There isn't an easement to allow the owners of the storage building to maintain the drainage system, which actually drains down to an existing large detention pond to the west of the site, probably about 700, 800 feet to the west. The stormwater eventually works its way back there, okay? There's two major discharge points that go back to that pond through this private property with no easements and no permission from the property owner to do so. Thirdly, there is another discharge point. I believe it's to the south of the property, right about the middle of the site, and it's maybe a few feet off of the property line. This just seems to dump right out into the adjoining property to the south into a parking area over some grass or something and trees and into a parking area. No easement. No right to do so. There's no vehicle to go in there and maintain the drainage system. It's an essential part because, well, it's all got to go somewhere. I didn't see any of these things. I don't know of any agreement that was made between the property owner and the developer to be able to handle the stormwater.
And just to interrupt, not to interrupt, but
Okay.
the property owner that you're referring to that the discharge is going to is the Hempstead Gardens Apartments. That's owned by the Hempstead Garden Apartments.
Yes.
Okay, and there was no easement or maintenance agreement of any kind that was entered into between the parties?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
You can continue, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, basically, this is very important for a couple reasons. One, you need permission to do these things. Two, part of compliance with the NJDEP rules and regulations and also the Township Ordinance, you need a maintenance O&M manual. You need a solid agreement to be able to go in and maintain these things. You need to provide water quality. This detention pond is going to be an essential part of the whole system. That's the way I see it. It's not just dumping into a stream. It's not dumping into a roadway that has a drainage system intact. None of that. Just wanted to make my point there. Easements haven't been acquired. The Hempstead Gardens has not been approached for permission. Okay, I don't want to belabor this, but
Has the Township Stormwater Management Ordinance, has the applicant complied with the ordinance with regard to their stormwater management plan?
generally, no. There's over a half a dozen items that they have not complied with that would require relief from the Township Board. Would also eventually, I believe, require relief from the NJDEP. I can go through those if you'd like.
Just
Each
briefly.
one, just
I would.
very briefly.
Yep.
I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is basically in accordance with Ordinance Section 330-7 and, well, various sections. 330 is the main section. 330-7J6. Required minimum orifice size for outlet structures is 2.5 inches. I believe they're proposing orifice structures that are 2 inches diameter. they would need relief for that. 330-7Q. They are requesting a waiver from groundwater recharge standards due to poor infiltration. I can understand that. However, it is going to need relief. Okay, it'll either need a waiver or a variance or something. Section 330-7R. Applicant hasn't properly designed the bioretention basins to completely be filled with water during the water quality storm. So the water quality standards haven't been met there, and that section hasn't been met, so they would need relief. Maximum pipe length for 12-inch diameter pipe between inlets. It should only be 30 feet. They have some sections that are greater than 30 feet. This would also need relief.
Where do they get the relief from?
The board.
Us?
This is in accordance to your ordinance. Yes. Sorry, is that all?
Yeah.
Okay. Required grade drop from foundation walls, minimum of 6 inches over the first 10 feet.
If you want to, for the record, just specify it's
I'm sorry.
7T6, if,
Sorry,
just so
that
we have
is-
a clear record.
Okay, what I mentioned before as far as the bioretention basins, that was section 330-7R. Maximum pipe length for 12-inch diameter pipe, section 330-7T, number 3. Required grade drop from foundation walls, section 330-7T, number 6. And basically, they have a shallow grade when it should be beefed up a bit from the foundation walls. Section 330-7T, number 10. Storm structures located at least 10 feet away from the property lines, and, well, we have 3 discharge structures, 2 emergency spillways that are less than 10 feet from the property lines. Section 330-11E. Let's see. No safety ledge provisions are shown on the plans in the biobasins, and there's no detail for them anywhere on the site plans that I saw. Section 330-12C, number 7. Well, there should be a plan that shows all the BNPs in the site, a nice package in the operations and maintenance manual, which there is none. So, not providing any, they're going to need relief from that section also. I believe they're the only ordinance sections that I've gone through. They're in a technical nature. They would all need relief. And also, there are a couple other things that I noticed,
Sure.
Counselor. In the report, right in the beginning, I believe it's on page 1, they're quoting the total area of new impervious surface to be 2.42 acres, which is 105,380 square feet, which, doing the math, is about 42%. Okay, that's 42% total impervious area where, well, we know, and I've checked it, it's 61% impervious area. That's a vast difference in total impervious area. So kicking off the drainage report on page 1, I see a huge difference in impervious area that should be addressed. Just wanted to mention that. Also with the detention ponds, I also noticed there is no access to maintain them.
Without permission from our client, my client.
Well, interior, on the interior
on the
site.
interior.
This is on the interior.
Okay.
Nor is there access to go outside
the
of the
exterior.
property. Right. Would you like me to just continue with the rest? Okay. Traffic circulation, I don't see anything from the fire chief. Basically, this building is higher than it should be. 3 stories. The height is higher than what is allowed. I think the fire chief should have something to say about that. I haven't seen anything. 25-foot drive aisle versus 26-foot required. I'm not sure why it's not 26 feet the way it should be. It just seems to me like it's unnecessary relief that wouldn't be needed, but it's what it is. That has to do with traffic circulation. Grading and utilities, I noticed there's a 7-foot-high plus retaining walls on the south side of the building. Considering the view, to the neighbors and the fact that we don't have a 50-foot required buffer, and not all the plantings, maybe only half of them, are 6 foot high, as proposed in the latest set of plans. At least it looked that way to me. At any rate, that is a concern. Also, if these walls fail, they're still relatively close to property line. And there are a portion of the walls that are built very close to the property line still, towards the east end of the site. How are they going to be built and maintained if something happens? Do they have a temporary construction easement or some sort of a way to encroach on the neighbor's property to maintain those, or even build them? I didn't see any. That's a concern. I believe that's all for grading and utilities. Overall, I just wanted to point out, let's see, we are providing less than half the required parking for this site that's required. The impervious area is over twice the amount that is allowed. We're packing the site. It's just being packed. Let's see, the plantings, again, not to belabor it, but 50-foot buffer, 6-foot-high plantings, what they're doing in their proposed plan. I know one adjoining property owner that may not be too pleased with that, and that would be for Hempstead Gardens. The buffers required, or the buffers provided, are anywhere from 29 feet to down to 9 feet, about half of what is required. Seems like we're offering a lot of, or we need to offer a lot of relief, a tremendous amount of relief for this development. It's just red flags everywhere saying, in my opinion, professional opinion, that this site is being packed.
And the Hempstead Gardens property, it's the entire length of the south of the property and also the western portion where the detention basin is.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. No further testimony?
The board questions.
I have a question of Mark. We've never had to give any kind of what I would call engineering variances here, and it seems to me that the issues that he's bringing up are things that have to be worked out between the applicant and the engineering department, or the deal doesn't go through. Typically, what we ask at the end is your client going to comply with all the requirements of engineering? And typically they say yes. So I'm not so sure. I think they're making a good point when it comes to the water leaves their property and it goes onto somebody else's property, and then it either comes to a stream or a pond. That was the other thing that made me scratch my head about the testimony. But is that more consistent with what you understand happens here?
Yeah, I can't really speak too much to this. This is really falls under engineering. But I think, I'm sure the applicant, they have their engineer here. They think he should be given the opportunity to provide a response.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, the way this board normally works is that if it's in the engineer's report, they need to work it out with the engineer. It is my understanding, again, generally, that under the new stormwater rules, if they don't comply with certain things, they need to ask for relief from this board. I can't really speak to that because, I'm not an engineer. Perhaps at the end of the testimony, the applicant's engineer will have a chance to respond. If you feel you need additional information, we can bring in somebody from CME to answer their report. So I think, just reading this, I think a lot of what he's bringing up was brought up in your engineer's report.
Yeah. Now, sir, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Chris.
Chris, the one thing that, you said a couple of things I thought were fascinating, but one of them was that the water is discharged onto his client's property, and then it moves across his client's property and into another retention basin?
Part of it does, yes. The major part of it does. It eventually will drain into a very large detention pond that's to the west I would say just behind the Hempstead Gardens development.
Okay, all right. And is there a stream back there also that some of this water goes into?
Eventually, I believe there is, yes.
Eventually is not a great word here. Okay.
And that detention basin is owned by Hempstead Gardens,
Yes.
correct? Okay, so
Yes.
it goes along their property and then goes into their detention basin.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
All right, I get it. Thank you. I have no further questions of this.
Any other board questions?
Just just one question, just to clarify the concern you raised about the construction of the walls, and then I think you had some concern about if there was some event at the building and the distance of the building to the property. So the building height is 34 feet, and the smallest setback is 45 feet. So you could explain, so the way I hear it, if the wall was to fall, it's going to fall on the property. But you seem to suggest otherwise. Could you clarify that concern?
Not much, no. What I'm worried about is if something happens to the wall, like, I'm not talking about a major collapse, but let's take, let's see, I'm going to go on the plan here. On the southeastern portion of the site, okay, right along the property line, you have, it looks like about a couple, maybe 100 or 200 feet of wall there that is like right up against the property line. You see what I mean?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Okay, it is on the eastern side of the site, near the entrance.
Okay.
Okay, the southern entrance. Yep. If you go in, and it's right along the property line, there's still a portion of wall there.
Okay.
Okay? And, I agree with you with the rest of it, except the portions of wall that are very high, if something happens. I'm saying...
Oh, this is the retaining wall you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If they have to repair this, if they have to go in, repair it, or how are they even going to build it without encroaching on the neighboring property?
Okay.
Did they look into or consider acquiring a temporary construction easement from the adjoining property owner?
Which is Hempstead Gardens.
Yes.
Because we're talking about the southern-eastern
Hempstead
portion of the
Gardens.
property.
Yes.
So your contention is if there were, even to construct a retaining wall or to make future repairs, there is no temporary easement that was given by our client to the applicant that would either allow them to build it while using part of our property or to access our property for the maintenance and repair.
That's correct.
Okay, I apologize. I thought you were talking about the walls of the building. So what you're saying is...
Oh, no, not the building walls.
There is a portion of the retaining wall that is close to the property line, and when in situations where there's a retaining wall close to the property line, it may be hard to construct it without encroaching onto the neighboring property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And then just one thing, I did want to clarify the record. The Director of Fire Prevention did do a report. It's May 8th. He does have comments on site. Fire hydrants with a looped water system are required. The location of the FDC, the fire department connection, must be approved and shown on the plans. The FDC must be within 50 feet of a hydrant. The gates must be equipped with a siren-activated device, and he brings up some examples. I'm not sure what this means. Pavers and not permitted. There's a typo there. Applicant can use porous pavement. I'm not sure what he means by that. Some areas will need to be designated no parking, fire lane. Applicant should contact fire prevention to discuss locations, signs, and pavement markings required. Applicant needs to submit a plan so the turning movements of the ladder truck can be evaluated. The current plan has a match line that doesn't allow the evaluation.
Thank you for that. Oops.
All I have, Mr. Chairman.
But any condition of approval would be complying with that report, right? That's the normal procedure. If there are no other board questions, would the applicant be ready to respond?
I just wanted to ask one question. I know you had indicated that obviously the applicant doesn't have any easements or agreement with the adjoining property owner for purposes of stormwater management, maintenance, construction, and so on. But I thought you mentioned that the current property owner has an easement or rights to maintain that ditch or swale?
No, I don't think I said that.
No,
maybe
Hempstead Gardens owns from the end of the detention basin that was proposed on the map, the area to the west of that, where the applicant stated the water would flow over and then end up through swales and flow over and then end up in a detention basin. That's all Hempstead Gardens property.
No, understood. I thought he said that the current property owner
No, there is no agreement.
that's the subject of the application had the right to maintain it on Hempstead's
Yeah,
property.
no, there's no
Thank you.
agreements. And since you're here, if you could just state, the existing, I think we went through it before the board on December 16th, but what's currently existing as far as impervious coverage to the site? It's a garden center.
Oh, the garden stuff?
Yeah, it's a...
I don't know offhand, so I'm going to go through the table.
Well, it's already been presented to the board. It's a garden center.
Well, it's a garden center,
and
sure.
the coverage that's proposed, I think you testified, is significantly greater than what exists
From
outside.
what exists, absolutely. Yes. Okay, I thought you were looking for numbers. No, yes, absolutely, it's more.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Sid, you ready?
Oh, okay. Well, that's what we were.
Yeah, we could do this.
Okay.
Move on to the planner, okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do apologize, I forget Chris's last name.
Starts with a B.
Briglia. Okay. Paul, you've heard the testimony of our objector engineer. For the record, I'm assuming that the engineer for the objector did read the minutes of the last hearing, but we did agree as a condition of approval to comply with all of the conditions in the reports that were given to us. So there would not be variance relief being necessary in that case. But Paul, if you could just go through, I know you were taking notes, and you can respond.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to go into detail on anything that gives the board specific concerns or you'd like me to elaborate on. But, just a couple of the points that we made, and I'll start with any of the waivers that was being spoken to from your ordinance for the stormwater. And I think the 46 comments that we currently have from your engineer is less of a display of a problem, but more of just a display of the thoroughness of your engineer. And he's done a very good job in making sure that this thing is designed in a very efficient and compliant way. So we're going to comply with all of his comments, and the only waiver relief that we would request from this board is anything that's specifically highlighted in his letter that he supports. And I think there are a couple of things, specifically the storm structures being separated from the property line, not meeting that minimum. We have moved those storm structures with the direction of your engineer, and certainly he has put in his letter that he supports the waiver of that specific section. So there's nothing that we're going to be doing as part of this stormwater management design that your reviewing engineer will not specifically endorse, or will address the comment and he'll comply with, and will comply with any of his comments. So that's the one thing I wanted to get into. And then as far as the discharge onto private property, as we discussed earlier, the property currently discharges in an uncontrolled manner onto the adjacent properties. All of our stormwater is captured, conveyed, detained on our site, and then discharged on our site as well. And then it eventually flows overland to the swales and the basins that we're talking about. in a way that meets all of the DEP requirements for reductions in peak flows and volumes and things of that nature. So the proposed design, and this happens to sites that aren't directly adjacent to a road where they can connect into the DOT system, we have to discharge the stormwater where it goes, and there's a couple of safety caveats that come with that. And first and foremost, it's your board engineer's responsibility to review and ensure that the proposed design will not have a negative impact on any other properties and designed in accordance with industry standards. And then we also have to obtain an approval from the Soil Conservation District. And in any case that's similar to this, they pay a lot more specific attention to downstream stability to ensure that runoff and other things coming from our site is not going to impact or cause erosion, stability issues, or flow over land and impact properties around us. So all of those approvals will come into this stormwater design. It is more unique than just connecting to an existing inlet in the road, because we do flow towards this basin, but it flows towards this basin today, and we're going to comply with all of the comments that your engineer gives to us.
Could I ask one quick question?
Certainly.
With the stormwater that you're detaining on site through your basin, discharging to the swale, ultimately leading to another detention basin on another property, does the detaining of water on the site impact that detention basin and make it not compliant with DEP regulations?
No, everything that we're doing on our site, all of our stormwater eventually ends up in that basin today. So what we're doing with our stormwater management basin is detaining it, slowing it down, so when it does reach that basin, it actually has a reduced impact on the basin rather than an increased, where you have the overland flow today. So those basins just let it trickle out, where today it would just be sheet flow overland to that basin. So it actually improved the function of the basin in the rear.
I understood what you're saying. I guess my concern is under existing conditions, it's going to flow differently to that existing basin than it does today. It's going to be collected and it's going to be discharged, like a point discharge. And I guess it's just my question is, did you analyze that basin in conjunction with the discharge of your basin?
No, and we don't have to in that sense, because what we have to do on our site to meet the DEP required reductions as part of this, it will have a downstream improvement on the runoff. We have to reduce our design storms by certain percentages
of peak flow
on our site, not on volume. That's correct.
And I guess that's the crutch of my question: is the volume going to impact that?
I don't think the volume will have any substantial impact on that basin.
Thank you.
Paul, if you could address the issue of the retaining wall, are we going to be able to build that without encroaching on the neighboring property?
Yeah, certainly. There's enough room there. Basically, the industry standards, if you can get a skid steer in between the wall and the property line, you don't need easements and construction easements to build it. I think at our closest point, we certainly have enough room for that, and the construction of the wall can really be built from face in. So we don't have any anticipation that we'll need a construction easement or any encroachment on the property to build that wall. And obviously, it'll be built to industry standards and approved by your engineer, so there won't be any issues with stability or any kind of worst-case scenario that we talked about a minute ago about it falling or failing or anything like that.
Does that conclude your response?
Yes.
Okay.
I just have a question, since it came up half a dozen or more times, and putting it into more ignorant people's terms, since I'm not an engineer and I'm not a lawyer or anything else. Does your client need an easement from Homestead Gardens to do anything?
We do not, and I would also follow the advice of your engineer as he reviews these stormwater plans and we bring it in. Obviously, if there were to be anything identified that we needed from them, we would get it, but at this time, there's nothing identified that we need per the current rules and regulations.
I'm just curious, and I'm not sure that you're able to answer, but in about 30 years or more sitting here, been on boards that have approved hundreds of projects that have water. Water has to be reduced when it leaves your property, and they're always flowing somewhere else downstream. And I have never ever heard of any issue where needed permission to set up a drainage pattern like that.
Yeah,
But
but
have I been missing a lot of testimony, or?
no, I would agree with your sentiment there, is that, you know, if you extrapolated it out and you had a property like this and and the water eventually ended up a mile away and you had to get easements for anywhere your water went, there could be a great number of properties you'd have to get an easement through to allow your water to go there. So I agree with you. I haven't seen that be the case. You know, if there was a pipe we had to run back, or if there was something we had to install that was new, certainly we would need it, but we're reusing the existing infrastructure and the existing swale in a way that complies with DEP regulations, your board engineer's comments, and things of that nature.
Okay, just to piggyback one more time on that water that might end up a mile away from your property is still, by regulation, less after your construction and everything is completed than it is today when nothing is there. Is that correct?
Yeah, the peak flows and everything that the DEP regulates will be less in that manner. And the fortunate piece that we have here, I guess the unfortunate, we have poor soil, so we can't rely on infiltration. But we've designed the basin in a way where it won't fail in the long term because the soil deteriorates. There's an underdrain, and there's things that will allow this basin to stay dry and functional for the long term. Because we have poor soils, we had to do it that way rather than rely on let's say 30 years from now, we're still infiltrating water, and sometimes soil deteriorates. You'll see that in some basins. That's going to be prevented here as part of this design because of the soil conditions that we encountered.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other board questions? Okay, we would be then moving to the objector's planner.
With me tonight is John Chadwick, professional planner.
I swear that any testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Name is John Chadwick, C-H-A-D.
We'll fast track this. You're still licensed in New Jersey.
I am.
Mr. Chadwick's been here literally dozens and dozens of times before both boards and always qualified as an expert. I don't see that anything would have changed tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have been present for all of the testimony this evening. Viewed the prior December meeting. Have re-examined the master plan, zoning ordinance, been to the site many, and have some comments on the application. Oh, it's a use variance. Mark's given you instructions. You have to find that this site is particularly suited for the proposed use. You can evaluate that criteria in a number of different ways. Is the use similar, compatible with the adjoining? You had an exhibit on the screen earlier, A1, that showed the site and all the surroundings. About 100 families live adjoining this site, Hempstead Gardens and in Kingsbury. Kingsbury is an owner-occupied, and Hempstead Garden is a rental project. Each of the Kingsbury quads are 16 units. Gave you the number of families by just the units that were property line. Hempstead Garden, each of the buildings is 12 units. Again, my estimate of 100 families. So this project is in the immediate backyard, front yard of 100 households. And is the building compatible with joining, which is something that you would evaluate in terms of ability? I concluded it's not. Building's 34 feet high, 3 stories, blank wall, 440 feet long. That's not what the joint Next part of particular suitability, is it consistent with the development regulations? An RC zone permits multifamily, which completely surrounds the property. Asking for, in my judgment, real bulk controls are coverage, building size, building coverage, and impervious coverage. In all cases, they're about 50%. You allow 2.5 stories. The half story is the red herring. Nobody knows what. Effectively, all the structures around this are 2-story. This will be 3-story. It'll be a building that's about as long as this room, high as this room is long. Different than what's adjoining by. Engineer for the applicant and the planner for the applicant emphasized they have reduced coverage and by pavement. Problem is you start out 50% over the standard. So when you reduce somewhat, yes, that's absolutely correct. But you started out, you're way over the standard. You're still way over the standard in both cases. Buffers that were described as extensive, bordering these homes. 29 feet is the third set of lights back from this room. Talking about in terms of distance. Now, this building is 34 feet high on a platform. One side they're lifting it up, the other side they're cutting in a little bit. We're looking out at it over 6-foot-high trees. I think and you got to scale this building. Size building. 6-foot-high plants are going to grow someday, but for quite a period of time, you're going to have a 34-foot-high building right in the face of all of these residents. It's a significant impact. Other variances, parking setback, front yard parking, 25 feet versus 26 feet. Wood can handle those. Be the most significant items involved with this application. Bulk of the building reflected in coverage. Nature of the building as it fits. Oh, there was a comment that the township had not recognized this. Certain, are there 2 or self-storage on?
Well, I don't remember the number, but self-storage is a permitted use in the business and industry zone.
So it's not as if the ordinance was amended.
Sorry, you're getting further and further away
I'm
from the
sorry.
mic.
Yeah, if I
In any
recall,
event, it's
I
in
think
the-
it was with the recent change to the business and industry zone, so it would have been like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. In any event, the town has recognized it as a common use within urban areas and has provided for it. So it's not as if it can't be placed in the community. My conclusion is the proposal cannot meet the standard of particular. The purpose is that it advances are, in my judgment, weak. I don't see this as a aesthetic improvement in context with its neighborhood. I consider it something that is vastly different what the neighborhood character and architecture is. In terms of providing for what purpose M in the municipal land use law is. Some discussion as to that. Public-private operation. I don't see any advances to the public benefit from this. See significant impacts. The last item was a variety of uses. Township zoning ordinance does provide for a variety of uses. Does provide for this particular. Get through the use variance process, you are then to weigh the pros against the negatives. There are clear differences with what the zoning plan calls for this location. I can't admit it. You could develop this for residential. Might not be what you think is been put on paper, but nobody did one. So we can't do that, but we know we can develop it for the use. Having said that, you have to get down to the bottom line of the greater than the positives. You weigh the differences and you come to a conclusion. My judgment is that it doesn't meet the standard for use variance approval and should be denied.
Thank you.
Board questions?
I do have a question. Do you believe that this use is more or less intense than the...
And what?
More or less intense than the existing use?
Oh, more.
And then in your professional opinion, is your larger concern the specific use or the magnitude of the development?
Both.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, let me piggyback on that a little bit. So when you say it's more intense, how do you measure that? In what ways is it more intense?
Well, if you just measure it by building bulk, obviously it's vastly bigger than what's there. It's 130-something thousand square feet versus what is kind of a barn architecture commercial building and with a trellis over on the side. During holidays, there's activity there, all concentrated at the front. Back area is a storage area for the business aspect of I've been traveling and working in the area for a lot of decades.
Mr.
Business-
Chadwick, can you
It's
please
a
move the mic
business that,
closer?
I'm sorry, a business that has survived, plan to move on. Just don't think the scale of this operation would compare to number of storage units planned in a 300,000 square foot.
And so I know I'm pretty sure there was testimony, but we definitely have heard testimony, that self-storage facilities are, at least from an activity and traffic perspective, are very low intensity. So what I'm generally hearing, and please correct me if I certainly don't want to put words in your mouth, but the comments that you're having about the incompatibility is a matter of the scale, the height, the scale, the length of the building, and its relation to the surrounding properties.
Yeah, and then, neglected to discuss, this storage yard that they have in the back, animal that is hard to get a handle on in terms of what its activity may or may not be. Talk about it as being long. Somebody's going to rent a boat there, they may be in and out every weekend. I don't know. RVs are going to go there. There's all sorts of things that could go in that storage yard. So that's an activity that's clearly not on the property today. And we can't measure it because we really don't know how it's going to be managed. They're going to put a roof over it. Contributes to their car. But it to compare to current business, landscape, flower business, versus what this is and the size and the bulk of the building. And the ripple that Craig Grandcamp stated in terms of, in his judgment, they're no longer just a residential use or residential client, meaning they got their lawn chairs in there, they got their skis in there, what they got in there. It's becoming a business use as well. And think about that. That's probably either dead storage files or files that come in and out, and the activity may or may not above and beyond what we'd always considered self-storage facilities. Would be daily activity there. Can't answer your question specifically, really repeating what Mr. Grandcamp said.
Any other questions? Okay, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
Mr. Rainkamp, you're still under oath. You've heard the testimony of the opposition's planner.
I have.
I saw you taking notes. Would you like to respond?
Yes, obviously I've known Mr. Chadwick for a very long time. We've both been doing this for a very long time. So I'm not going to sort of gainsay everything he said. It's ultimately up to the board if the aesthetics are good or bad or that sort of thing. There were 4 specific points that I'd like to address. John, in his testimony, suggested that the standard is that there be something similar. And I would suggest to you that's not really the standard. The standard is whether there's a substantial detriment. And as a planner, we look to things we can measure. Dust, noise, light, radiation, vibration, all the things you see in a performance ordinance in your industrial zones typically. None of those things are happening here. There's no detriment crossing the property line having an impact on the neighbors. There's what they see, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of creating a substantial detriment going beyond the property line, I don't see something here that's measurable that you could say is somehow having an effect on the neighbors. And under TWC, we've got a very specific standard. We look around the properties, and is somebody unable to use their land as zoned? And I don't think that's the case at all. The 2 existing residential developments are going to be residential developments. Their ability, if they were empty land to be developed for residential, is not going to be compromised by this. So I don't see anything in terms of the substantial detriment standards that we actually have in planning law in New Jersey. In terms of its visual impact, John's right. This is a long building. It is different in that regard. But if you imagine this to be developed in a conforming use, it's not just going to be a building in the front half and the canopy in the rear. It's going to be a row of townhouses along the property line or along of multifamily buildings. So yeah, there'll be breaks, but there'll be buildings. It's not as if it's going to be an empty site under the permitted uses. You're still going to have 2.5-story buildings. Their peaks are going to be as high as this building is. So it's not as if we're measuring this building against nothing. We're measuring it against an equally long amount of building with breaks in between. But it's still going to be a long building along that property line. In terms of height, we are conforming in terms of the overall height. Yes, we want 3 stories instead of 2.5, but the overall height of the building is no taller than is permitted in that zoning district. It's no taller than the county office building up the road a little. And I don't think you drive by that and say, oh, that feels dramatically different than everything else in the area. It's set back a little bit more, has a little bit more landscaping than we do. But this is not a building that's out of scale with what you typically see in suburbia. I drove here coming up Route 130, and this is not as big as the warehouses you drive by. It's really not that different a building as you would experience in suburban New Jersey. The extent of coverage changing. We've done something consistent with your ordinances. I'm not saying it's anything special, but we're essentially treating the existing use, the garden center, as if everything beyond the pavement in the back is wonderful for having water penetrate from a stormwater perspective. We all know that once you've compacted the earth, the capillary action doesn't happen anymore. And if you're storing stuff on it and you're driving tractor trailers over it, as a practical matter, it's not very good for stormwater absorption. But we're treating that as if it was open farm field and compensating for that in our stormwater management plan. So we've set ourselves back by saying, it's essentially an undeveloped site for half of it, and we're going to mitigate all of the additional water. So not only are we better in terms of reducing, in terms of the history of other applications, we're doing twice as much because because of the assumptions we're making about heavily compacted land area and treating them as pervious, even though they clearly aren't. I think that's all I had. Oh, in terms of the nature of the use, the last thing I wanted to say. And I do acknowledge that the municipality did go through putting self-storage in your business and industry zone, which I suppose gets you past the we don't permit it anywhere kind of argument. But this is a use that's really a service use that wants to be near residential areas. When you do market studies for these uses, the first question is how many people live within a 3-mile circle? This is very much like barber shops or other kinds of things, nail salons, that are services to residential neighborhoods and want to be as close to them as they possibly can. So saying, yeah, you could do it over, in a highway in a corner in town, you may allow it somewhere, but it's not what this use is really trying to have as a neighborhood to be a service for a community. So it's not surprising to me at all that this use wants to be in this location. And that's all I have. The rest I'll leave to the board's judgment between what John said to you and what I've said to you.
Okay, any comments? That's everything to the point from everyone. Then we'll be appropriate at this time to open to the public for any of those who are not represented by council who have a comment, question, or anything you want to say concerning the project. If you are one of those people, please come to the podium and be sworn in. I guess if this is new since we haven't been in person for 2 years, so we'll take 5 minutes. We'll take a 5-minute adjournment. Yeah. Yep. moment here. If so, we'll call the meeting back to order. We just opened to the public, and I believe Mr. Hoover asked to speak. And this is open questions, comments, just have to be sworn in.
Can you just raise your right hand, Mr. Hoover? Do you swear that any testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You do?
For the record, if you could just give your name.
Chip Hoover, H-O-E-V-E-R. I am the Vice President of Operations for Matrix Property Management, previously Somerset Management Group, and I've been managing Kingsbury Acres for 12 years.
And I know, for the record, I just want to, you handed a letter dated April 8th, 2022 from yourself, and I assume as part of your testimony, you're going to summarize that. And did you provide copies to counsel for the applicant and the objector?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. And we'll mark that as P1.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you all for allowing me to speak. As I said, I represent Kingsbury Acres Board of Trustees. We met with the applicant when they first brought forth their application, and we had some immediate concerns, one of which was the drainage off the site. We also had concerns about lighting, fencing, buffering, et cetera. We had several opportunities to work with the applicant and their professionals, and all during that time, they were very cooperative to listen to what we had to say and very courteous, and made a lot of changes based on our requests. Most significantly, the water drainage issue and the detention basin. I think you'll recall when we had the meeting, maybe in February, I was the one with the loud mouth that kept picking on their planner. Again, they have since helped us out and made a lot of changes. As far as use goes, this is a personal observation. I'm in no way a professional, but we currently get complaints about trucks starting at 3 in the morning over at the nursery and trucks in and out and the dust. Again, we feel, the board feels that the use intended would be a lot less than the current use. Holiday season, Christmas season, Easter season, God bless families, they do a fantastic business. But it's a lot of traffic over there during the holidays. As far as using storage space, I have a storage space on Veronica Avenue, and I've had it there probably 6, 7 years. Last time I was there was maybe 6 months ago, if that, or longer. We hardly ever go over. Mostly dead files and things that are just there for storage. So, I don't think it's going to be a use of people going to get their water skis every weekend. It's too far from the shore. In any event, that is pretty much all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. If not, I hope your bated breath is okay and I satisfied your needs. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else in the audience? Come on up to the podium. Name, address, and you'll be sworn in.
Hi, I'll be quick. My name is Erica Malloy. I am an owner in Kingsbury Acres, and sorry.
Just raise your right hand. The
Yes.
testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, it will.
Thank you.
As I said, I live an owner in Kingsbury Acres, and I live very close to the fence near where they're going to build. So I am very concerned about all of this and what they're talking about. My house, Unit 60, is very, very close to all of this. So I will say that I am happy to hear that they are being very considerate in making sure that that fence is going to be, I guess I should say, pretty or acceptable to all of the residents. I'm here kind of representing Elliott Court, for those of us that actually face it. That's what our most concern is right now. What we have there is not very pretty. We did have a lot of trouble with rodents there, and we do, unfortunately, right now, we do have a lot of trouble with loud trucks. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, they're starting, they're humming. So we too are excited and hoping that once things are cleaned up and we do have a wall there and all, that it will help us on our side too. One question we do have, we are wondering, though, when it's going to start, and as far as the noise, and are there any kind of construction ordinances as far as the noise and all? And that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't cite what they are, but there is a noise ordinance, and there are timeframes during the day, during the weekday and in the weekend that they can do construction. Again, off the top of my head, I can't cite what they are, but there's a certain time in the morning where they can start and a certain time in the evening that they have to stop.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we will close public. Would the applicant like to sum up first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, members of the public who spoke. We're very excited about this project. You know, it's our understanding, and everybody understands here, that we won't be getting a vote tonight on this. The transcript and the video will be provided to the members that were missing. They'll sign a certification stating that they've read those minutes and watched the video, which will allow them to vote, hopefully at the next session. But we're very excited. We believe that we've met the standards for this board to grant preliminary and final site plan approval, along with the variance relief being requested. As you've heard from half of our neighbors, they're excited about the project. We believe it will clean up the area and provide a use that is acceptable to those. Like some applications, we do have some opponents. We've done what we believe is everything we can to help make this project good for our neighbors. Clearly, we want to be a good neighbor. We've met with our neighbors. We've offered to meet with neighbors. We've listened to concerns. We've removed parking along the southern property line, tried to give a bigger buffer there. And again, we want to be a good neighbor. We want to be a member of the community. We believe that we will do that if this board views this application favorably. So with that, I would just ask that at the next session, the board grant preliminary and final site plan approval with the variance relief being requested, and we'll look forward to being a productive and good member of the community. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. You, sir?
I think not only our engineers and planners' testimony, but the applicant's own engineers and planner, in our opinion, show that the use and suitability is a detriment. It's non-conforming in every possible way, both in use and in magnitude of the development, and we would respectfully submit that the board deny the application, regardless of the fact that they made a few changes and reduced the numerous non-conforming areas of their plan, which are still non-conforming. So we would respectfully request that the application be denied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What is our next date?
They're going to be coming back on May 5th. We have quite a full schedule on May 5th, but as promised to Mr. Murphy, as long as the three gentlemen who are not here this evening have no questions of the professionals, we will have this on first so that it can be voted on and have their answer.
Okay, and that's the key. The idea is now the hearing is closed. When we come back at the next meeting, we'll take a vote. It will be a closed hearing in the sense that the only possible discussion would be if there's a board concern or question or whatever. It's not going to be open to the public. It's over. This will happen unless something between now and then that's very unforeseen occurs. I don't know what it might be. Three board members are very dedicated, reliable people who are unfortunately not able to be here So they will take care of the business that they need to take care of, and we should be good to go right away with a vote. Any questions? Then it also, of course, goes without saying that this application is carried May 4th?
May 5th.
May 5th, sorry. No further notification.
7:30 PM.
Don't come on May 4th.
So the application will be carried to May 5th at 7:30 PM here in this chambers, and carried to.
Okay, anyone want to move for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
A second.
I know no one's opposed, so I'm not even going to ask. Meeting adjourned.